So I think Bitcoin is very important because it just shows the fragility of, the traditional financial infrastructure.
I want to quote one of your all-time most popular tweets. When Bitcoin gets to 150,000, I'll buy the Hamptons and convert it to a sleepaway camp for kids, working farms, and low-cost housing. What inspired you to write that one?
Well, I can't take all the credit. Friends of mine and I, we have a little group chat, and we were just, talking about random things for the summer, in the hope that the pandemic eases. And one of my friends, Rob Bloomberg, actually was the one that said champion. And it just kind of like set off a light bulb. And then I just wrote it and I kind of published it. It's very tongue in cheek. I mean, I did another one which said, I think when Bitcoin gets to 40,000 or 100,000, I'm going to buy Goldman Sachs and rename it Chamath Sachs. These are all jokes. This is the part of my personality that some folks don't get, which is this is just tongue in cheek. It's just, honestly, I never thought I'd be here. I'm enjoying the ride. Every minute of this feels like a complete dream to me.
I admire you for not taking yourself too seriously. The Bitcoin thing, however, is very serious.
Yeah.
North of $40,000. So it's not 150. You can't buy the Hamptons yet. It's not 100. You can't buy Goldman Sachs yet. But
can I tell you something about Bitcoin, which is so important? So I think Bitcoin is very important because it just shows the fragility of, the traditional financial infrastructure. And if you just look at the quantity and the size of the M2 money supply as an example, the real question that I think people should be asking ourselves is, okay, if Bitcoin becomes a de facto reserve currency that basically displaces gold, what replaces the US dollar? And here's where, if you want to just bear with me for a second, it's not Bitcoin that replaces the US dollar. It is a stable coin. And what does all of that mean? In less fancy language, there are companies around the world that are replacing one fixed US dollar with one digital token of a US dollar. And by simply making that small abstraction, they're able to completely build financial rails that didn't exist. On-ramps and off-ramps to trading, to asset management, to banking, to payments processing. There's a revolution happening. It's not felt as much in the United States because people don't see it because the financial services infrastructure is so robust. But when you look at the developing world, and if you look in any market where there is any form of currency manipulation or currency instability, that's the future. And so, Bitcoin is a canary in a coal mine for a completely virtual, largely anonymous, and we can debate whether that's good or not, financial reality. And so, I think that it's a very important trend that's worth understanding. The other thing is, so many of the dislocations that we've seen won't happen anymore when we go on those rails. So, going back to this whole GameStop debacle, as I've learned more, and as you probably know now too, a lot of this has to do with the arcane way in which stocks are settled. And what I learned was we used to have a T+3, after the trading day, 3 days later is when you'd settle. And it was moving heaven and earth, crying and screaming to move companies to go to T+2. Well, if you're running a stable coin or, smart contracts on top of Ethereum, all of this next generation infrastructure, this is T+2, right? You're settling things in a nanosecond. And that's really good for everybody.
In addition to Bitcoin, which coins, if you will, cryptocurrencies, digital assets, are you a holder of? Are you a believer in?
Well, I will be publishing this soon. I am building a fairly sizable portfolio of what are called NFTs, non-fungible tokens, some digital art, some virtual trading cards. And these may sound crazy to some, but I do think that that's the next frontier of digital currency and digital assets. And so I have been building a portfolio. My decision is the team and I will announce it. We will publicize everything we own, and we will make our holdings transparent so that folks can track along and see as we buy and sell things. So that's coming in a few months. I'm not really ready to show the details of exactly what we hold yet, but I'm really excited. Maybe in a few weeks, actually, but I'm very excited. We're almost ready to tell the world.
Do you still want to break up big tech?
Well, I think they need to get regulated. I think that companies like Facebook and Google will be subject to much stricter laws. Section 230 will change and recognize them as quasi-publishers. And I say quasi because this is where, again, laws and politicians' understanding of the economy is still too brittle. But if they can bring the right people to teach them what an algorithm is, and what machine learning and what weights are and how these things operate, what they'll see is a mechanized publisher. And there should be rules for mechanized publishers that are different from being a dumb pipe. So I think that that's going to happen. And then, for Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon, I don't think that much is going to happen. And the reason is because I think that those guys are generally on the right side of history, and they generally don't err towards the type of hot button issues that politicians care about. Like Facebook and Google threaten the institutionalized structures of power and influence that codify politics. Amazon Prime doesn't do that. Getting toothpaste, the next day, it's just not that disruptive. So, the laws will affect the folks that, threaten to disrupt politicians first and foremost.
And you think politicians can meet that threat with regulation, as opposed to, in Facebook's case, forcing the company to divest of, say, Instagram or WhatsApp?
Well, can they? I'm not sure that they can. Will they? Yes. And I think that, look, when you look at Mark's stated strategy, Zuck's stated strategy, if I had to, again, do a one-pager for that laboriously long thing that he wrote, it's basically what he said was, I am going to take all these products, I'm going to entangle them together so that institutionally this code base is monolithic. Now, this is an engineer speaking to you. Such that if any sort of, carve-outs or divestitures were to come to pass, it would take years for us to disentangle this mess, which are many more years where I can bet on the laws changing, the government changing, or their minds changing. So I think from a business strategy perspective, it was both obvious and brilliant. But I don't think it was seen for what it was by politicians.